At any rate, so I figured I'd first start playing a little bit of the Mennonite game so I can establish my credentials with this particular group. I grew up in Buhler, Kansas. I learned to read from a wonderful teacher who at the time I simply knew as Mrs. Thiessen. During high school, the Buhler Mennonite Youth Fellowship, Buhler Church Mennonite Youth Fellowship, frequently got together with the youth group from the Hebrew Mennonite Church, a church pastored by Emil Kym. I attended Bethel for 4 years, and during that time I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my history degree, so I got wise counsel from Keith Sprunger, and he helped me get in touch with somebody at the Kansas State Historical Society who told me about a special program in Cooperstown, New York, State University of New York program, and that's where I got my master's degree, my graduate degree in American folk culture, Cooperstown, New York, which I'll be there actually next weekend. I knew that I'd kind of grown up in a folk culture, a folk environment with traditional Mennonite foods like you've been enjoying this today, like varenica and borscht. Borscht, cabbage, if you're on one side of Turkey Creek, beet borscht on the other side of Turkey Creek. So Buhler's on one side, Dridge, Mount Dridge is on the other. So those are kind of folk things. Threshing stones certainly were part of a very important part of our heritage. And then there were the stories that were told, most of which I didn't understand, because they were usually told in Plautdeutsch, in Low German, at the Buhler barber shop. So the men would be talking along in English. All of a sudden, one of them would start speaking in Low Dutch, and all of a sudden, at the end of his story, everybody would laugh. And I knew they had just told a dirty joke, because they didn't want us kids to hear it. So I kind of grew up with knowing I was in kind of a folk culture group, and thus when I went to New York, that was part of the reason they accepted me. It's interesting the stereotypes that they were dealing with in upstate New York, because when I got there, some of them said they had been wondering how I was going to get everything transported from Kansas in my horse and buggy. So, I was able to inform them that not all Mennonites are alike, and in fact, there are about 57 varieties and counting at this point, I think. At any rate, but I did not realize I grew up also surrounded by folk art. It took that time in upstate New York and a class with two wonderful people, Lou and Aggie Jones, preeminent folk art scholars, and they opened my eyes to what was really here. See if that does it. There we go. I'd heard about houses around Buhler that were decorated with rather fantastic paintings of the Alps, but had never seen them. When I returned to Buhler over that Christmas, I began to seek them out and quickly realized their importance. Among other things, up until 1975, comparatively few wall paintings had been found in the West. I photographed some of the walls and returned to New York with my slides. The Joneses were absolutely amazed when they saw them. And later I took the images to a woman, Nina Fletcher Little, who lived outside of Boston, who was a specialist in wall paintings. And she was quite astounded as well. She said, "This is amazing. We do not see things like that in the West." So it was really great because all of a sudden my master's thesis had dropped into my lap. I had it all fresh and ready to start. Wall painting in America was done primarily in the 18th and 19th centuries along the East Coast. This is a wall painting that was removed from an 1831 house in upstate New York and installed in the Winterthur Decorative Arts Museum in Delaware. The tradition of wall painting along the East Coast originated primarily among the English in Europe. It was a decorative movement primarily, again, among the more wealthy people. Starting in the 19th century, late 18th century, it was practiced in the American colonies, where often untrained or minimally trained painters decorated the walls of the homes of the rising middle class. Unlike frescoes, which are actually done on wet plaster, Leonardo da Vinci with his Last Supper, these kind of wall paintings were done on dry plaster walls, where the wall itself acted as the canvas. They offered a decorative alternative to expensive wallpaper. Well, In the northeastern and, well, southeastern in some areas, parts of the U.S., this pretty much died off after the Civil War, where mass printing brought the price of wallpaper down. That was sort of the first wave of wall painting. But what happens then in the second half of the 19th century and the early 20th century as well? There was an influx of immigrants, and many of you are aware of this story. Immigrants came to the West from the rest of Europe, coming from places like Eastern Europe, Italy, coming from the Scandinavian countries, and coming from places like the Malachna in the Ukraine and in Russia. Among them were house painters and decorators who brought traditions of wall painting from the continent of Europe. It was a wall painting for the middle class, inspired by European traditions of painting in cathedrals and homes of the very wealthy. And so these immigrants painted furniture and houses at places like Decorah, Iowa, where you see this Rosemald chest. That's if they were Norwegian. Round Top, Texas, they would paint if they were German as well. Ord, Nebraska, there were Czech painters as well. And some of the Mennonites from Russia brought furniture painting traditions, and we've seen that already here at the Kauffman Museum a number of years in their exhibit. But of all these artists, these immigrant artists, really the most prolific of them all was this man from Murlen, Switzerland, who settled in the middle of the Mennonites in the plains of Kansas, right in this area. So, remember my first grade teacher, Mrs. Thiessen. I found out her name was Bertha. See, you weren't supposed to use first names in those days. And she was one of Emil Kym's daughters. Emil Kym was that painter. And Marlon Kym, who's with us. I found out he, who I'd gotten to know at Hebron Mennonite Church, was one of Marlon Kym's grandsons. Any other Kym descendants? I think we already got through that. You may be the only Kym descendant here right today. So I had an immediate connection to Emil Kym. My dad was Orlando Friesen, the background there. He was a Bueller doctor, so he knew everyone in the community. I think he'd seen some of these on people's walls doing house calls. Soon I was learning more and more about other paintings done by Emil Kym in the area. In addition to the murals, he did wood graining on cheap wood, very common at those days. Cheap pine wood, make it look like a more expensive kind of wood. He would also paint wood grain on plaster. He did marbling on plaster and did some furniture decorating, and then he did just plain old interior painting. You wanted a wall painted? He would do it, but sometimes there was more. And he also would do wallpapering for you. It was popular, and he had to make a living, so he did wallpapering. And you'll see here, maybe I'll use this nifty pointer. No, I won't. Can't figure out how it goes. I know Chuck told me how to do it. But if you look down there, E. Kym, Mound Ridge, Route 1, Kansas. So I have secured the agency for the decorative offering of Western Wallpaper Company. So he did that too. But if Emil Kym was just doing regular wall painting in your house, painting your interiors, or wallpapering, and he liked you, and you had a little extra money to pay, he might do a mural. Word of his craft spread, and some people hired him specifically to not only do wood graining and marbling, but also to paint murals. So I'm going to show you some of those photos in a few minutes, but I want to give you a little background on Emil Kym. Emil was born in the town of Murlen, Switzerland. You've seen Rheinfelden. It's not there's the Rhine River wandering around it. There's Murlen, Mohlin, and I'm trying to do the umlaut properly. There, it's just across the river, actually, from Germany. So just on the other side of the Rhine is Germany. Here's a photograph of Kym's boyhood home. So you get a sense of some of the style of the architecture there. Here today are some of the more historic homes that are still standing in Murlen, Switzerland. And here's a view of the town. Notice if you look into the distance, there they are, the Alps. So you're along the Rhine, but you can see the Alps in the distance. They will figure into Kym's paintings, as does the Murlen, see, I'm no good at this, church steeple. And there you see, this is actually a picture from the early 1900s of the local church where Emil attended. It was a former Catholic church that became Christian Reformed during the Reformation. And here is the picture of that church today. Now, the information about Emil Kym's art background is unclear. He supposedly studied art in Paris at the Paris Art School, but I could not find a school with a specific name. It's a rather generic name, which made me wonder if he either forgot a specific name or might have just exaggerated a little bit in telling stories about his background. And you run into this with family stories, and any of you that are doing family genealogy, always make sure you have several grains of salt when you're looking into family stories. According to one family account, he learned art from an instructor and lived with that instructor in Paris at a time when there was a war between France and Germany. But the only problem is the only time there was a war between France and Germany at that time was 1870 to 1871. He would have been only 8 years old. So, and this is not unusual. We get these, there is always a kernel of truth, but sometimes it gets changed over time with the telling of the stories. Like some of you that fish and what you talk about, what you really caught. So there's a little more question that one has to ask. I think he had some art training somewhere, but not a great deal. His military service record book from Switzerland referred to him as a Maler or painter. Now, while the word Maler could mean a fine artist, it could also mean somebody who paints houses or a decorator. The other profession listed for him in the military service book is as a paper hanger. So this association suggests to me he was a house painter and decorator, which was a profession he followed while he was in the Beulah Moundridge area. Both of those skills could have been learned by him in an apprenticeship or from an instructor. In Paris, maybe or maybe not. While the details of the family account may be incorrect, the general story, which is that he left home to study his craft, is probably correct. Where did he go during that learning period? Nobody knows yet, I don't believe. It's kind of a mystery. Perhaps he lived somewhere else in Switzerland where he could see these Alps every day. Certainly there are elements of his work which reflect parts of Switzerland that are not Merlin. Kym's work is a better clue to his training. He was an accomplished decorator doing very good wood graining and marbling, and this was his box, actually, full of wood graining supplies and tools. You can even see the false grain he's added to the lid of that box. His wall murals show that he was someone who was talented, who had comparatively little, if any, training in fine art. In fact, in some of his paintings, large items in the foreground are smaller than small items in the background. So there's little attention to linear perspective, the sort of thing that happened in the Renaissance and revolutionized a lot of art. So there's not much linear perspective, and that's not unusual among folk artists. They're trying to get a story across, they're trying to get an image across. They don't care about some of those details. So I think he would best be called a folk artist, which is why I did my thesis on him. So Kym, here's a picture of him as a young man with his family in Switzerland. He entered the Swiss Army at age 20. Because of his flat feet, he became a cook and a butcher in the Army rather than having to go through more rigorous training and service. He did 1 year of the training and then took his equipment home when he began civilian life, and that was very common. 1 year of training, and then you took all your stuff at home, ready to be activated if Switzerland was invaded. He married Josepha Schneider at age 21 and had 4 children with her before she died 10 years later. During that time, he did house painting and wallpapering. He reportedly did some wall paintings also in Switzerland, but there are no such paintings that I'm aware of that are similar to these that are verifiable in Switzerland. I don't know what the Kym family has found since. You haven't found that either, okay? Well, after Josepha's death, he met a girl by the name of Elise Bose, and they became engaged. He decided that he would move to America to start a business as an interior decorator, and then he, after he got settled in, would send for Elise and his children. Not an unusual thing for immigrants to the United States at that time. When he left for America, his passport read, Emil Kym, Maler. Again, Maler, painter. When he arrived in the U.S., his name was changed from K-Y-M Kym to K-I-M. By the folks that did the immigration. And we know about those stories when they came through places like Ellis Island. The guys would hear their name and just write down what they thought it was. In this case, he kind of used the name K-I-M Kym or K-Y-M Kym rather interchangeably, and I believe today it's all K-I-M. Is that correct?
K-Y-M with the exception of one grandson who remained K-I-M.
Okay, KIM with the exception, no, KYM with the exception who one grandson had decided to stay as KIM. So you're still kind of changing the name a little bit, changing it back.
When we do a Kym's cousin, it's KYM/KIM cousin reunion.
KIM/KYM. I'll get that right eventually. But anyway, it gets a little confusing. And that's a short name. Imagine working with a Friesen. But in anyway, I don't exactly know why he came to south central Kansas. It's possible he met some Mennonites in Switzerland who recommended it to him. And again, I don't know if the family's heard any stories about that since I did my research. If there is, we can talk about that.
We think there was a brother living in America.
Okay.
And said, come to America, there's job opportunity.
A brother living in America who said, come to America, there's job opportunity. Now, how we ended up with the Mennonites, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But at any rate, he first arrived at Alexandroville community, and he made enough money then to send for Elise and his eldest daughter, Anna. While there, he did wood graining and marbling of the interior of the Alexandroville church in 1896. It has been remodeled so often, I don't believe any of his work has survived. And that is the Alexandroville church. I got that right? Okay, so you can see up there, all that decorative work there along the balcony, that would have been done by Emil Kym.
He also did the pews.
He did the pews, okay. And you can't really see the pews on this one. Oh, well, actually you can here. So the wood graining was done by the pews, okay. And see, we have some people who have done more research since I did this that are in the room. So later on when we get the Q&A session, if I can't answer it, they might be able to, and if we can't answer it, we won't make anything up. Here we have the acre. In 1898, the Kyms moved to the Hoffnungsau community. They lived on an acre of land, which they called the acre. Soon they started having children, 6 altogether, one of whom was my first grade teacher, Bertha. Emil barely made enough to support this large family and was never able to send for his other 3 children in Switzerland. So they grew up there with other family members, and he had this new family of 6, plus he had the daughter that came across, if I'm correct. The Kym family integrated well into the Mennonite community surrounding them. They became friends with members of the Hoffnungsau church and were helped by some of them when times were hard. Emil did regular interior painting and wallpapering for a number of different houses in the area, and I didn't even track a lot of that because that was just regular painting, regular wallpapering. He also did wood graining. This is a pretty neat example. You can see here, he not only grained the wood, but down there to the right, he grained the plaster as well. And there's a little section that's fallen away. He did the wood graining and marbling in the old Hoffnungsau church, just as he had done at Alexandroville. His paintings of the Alps are primarily in the houses of persons who were friends or had helped the family out. Most of them were done prior to 1910, when the paintings actually cost less than wallpaper. After that, the price of wallpaper went down and the painting's popularity seemed to wane, and we saw this a little earlier, his card announcing his new wallpaper offerings. By the time, though, that he was primarily doing wallpaper and painting, he had already gotten this reputation in the community as being Mahler Kym. And I ran across people, oh yeah, we remember Mahler Kym. There's much more that could be told about his family and life, but let's take a look at a few of his paintings. This is the Hoffnungsau Church. One of Emil's first decorating projects, once he moved in a Hoffnungsau community, was to decorate the interior of the church. I haven't found any interior photos of it. Glenn, maybe in your work you might have. You have found one, okay. But I did find this lettering on the outside that was done by Kym. Now, Emil Kym died on January 7, 1918, at the age of 56. He was buried in the Hoffnungsau Church Cemetery, and when you entered the cemetery at the time, you went through an arch with the words, Friedhof der Hoffnungsau Gemeinde, which was something he had painted on that entrance. So, few, if any, of the homes I visited back in 1976 are still owned by the same persons. So this is where I'm kind of trying to update, because most of my work was done in 76. I haven't really done much since. At the time, most of the houses were along the Dutch Avenue, or north of it, and you see Dutch Avenue there, and you see Bueller to our left. At least one of the houses has been moved. I found 13 places with Kym decorations in them, ranging from marbling and wood graining to murals. I was able to photograph some, but others had either been painted over or wallpapered over. I should note that wallpaper does not destroy the scenes, and it is possible that some of the wallpaper has been removed since I did my research in 1976, and people can see them, or some scenes may still be under wallpaper in people's houses, and they don't even realize it, because that's the way we found some of the papers, some of these paintings back in 76. Brian Stuckey, you may have found some more paintings since I did my research. You haven't, so there may be some out there to be discovered, but don't go ripping up your wallpaper just yet. We'll be looking at the houses marked on the map. You see there's where there's a 1 down there, Wall, 1904, 2, Flickinger, 1908, 3, Taylor, 1903, 4, Nelson, 1906. Those are the people that owned the house at the time. The Wall house was originally the Lorentz house, painted by Kym in 1904. The Flickinger house was originally the P.C. Gehring house, painted in 1908. The Taylor house was originally the Abram Ratzloff house, painted in 1903. And the Nelson house was originally the Martins house, painted in 1906. So let's start out with the Lorentz house mural, which we saw earlier. He also did wood graining and marbling in the house. Obviously, this is not Kansas in this particular scene. It is not a Colorado scene. This is a scene of the Alps, constructed from Emil Kym's memories. There are elements from Maryland, like the church, which is similar to the one he attended while growing up in Maryland. But Maryland is not in the Alps, so this really is not a picture of Maryland either. It's basically a romantic, perhaps even nostalgic image of Switzerland and the Alps. Some of the nostalgia that you might feel as an immigrant to a very different land for the place where you grew up. Many of the elements that you see in this scene are repeated in other paintings, like you have the church, a bridge over a stream, and then, of course, the high peaks in the background. You'll see some birds. Their wings are backwards. They're flying wrong if you know the way birds work. If you know the way birds' wings work, they don't work that way. So, here we see a fisherman right in the foreground. He's just caught something. His friend's watching. There are also 2 small boats in the lower right-hand corner, which are actually closer to you than the fishermen, which are bigger than the boats. So that's part of that perspective that isn't there. That house also had wood graining and marbling by Kym, and there were some transoms over some of the upstairs doors, which had been etched and hand-painted by Kym. Here's the P.C. Gehring home. Had several Swiss scenes on the first floor and on the second floor, as well as marbled walls in the stairwell. I've not been able to locate my slide of the mural on the first floor. Some of these things have been in my basement a few years. There are snow scenes on either side of a door on the second floor. So this is the first scene, you see. It's a snow scene. There are the cattle. There's a woman out front. There's a man with the cattle. Here's the second. And you'll see there's a little bit of whimsy, and Kym often would like to add not only scenes of everyday life, but a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of fun to some of his pictures. On the second floor, there is also a light picture where he painted a rose in that medallion. What are those medallions called, Montalie? Oh, rose medallion. Well, I mean, there's a medallion usually around your light. Just a medallion. And he painted roses. A little bit like the rose mauling that you see the Norwegians doing. This is the Abram Ratzloff house. It was the most extensively decorated house I found. It was the largest house, and the Ratzloffs were among the wealthiest people in the community. So this kind of makes sense. The stairway to the second floor and the walls of the second floor hallway were marbleized by Kym. So that's plaster, painted to look like marble. It looks very real. He was very good at that. He painted the face of one of the boys, the Ratzloff boys. His nickname was Cotton Top. I don't know if any of you knew Cotton Top. I didn't know Cotton Top. Into the marbling. And at the Oh, house in Gossel. Oh, now, this is where age is catching up. My Rolodex doesn't work fast. Jerry Taves' house. Thank you very much. Jerry Taves' house, he did, I think, marbling, and he painted a profile of his own face in their work. So here's the second floor, and inside the wells of the window, he actually did scenes. That's above the window. These are windows to the outside. You see some of these common elements in his paintings. And here's a different window, and here you can kind of see that sort of well or whatever. And you see the snow scene. And we even have a little water pump with a trough. And a view, again, here we have a boy and his dog walking out of the log structure. The most remarkable room in the Ratzlaff house was the parlor. As you stood in the center and turned around, rotated, you saw a variety of Swiss scenes in the summer, many with interesting details. So imagine, you're in the parlor and you look to one wall and you see this. You keep turning around, you see that. And that. Let's go back here. One thing I want to mention, this looks like that's lost. That is not. That is wallpaper that was still stuck over the paintings. So that's what I meant earlier about wallpaper actually can help preserve those paintings. Of course, at the time, I did not have permission to take that wallpaper off and wouldn't have done it unless I could do it a certain way. So there's more of a scene under all of that wallpaper as well. Now, if you notice those columns, look up to the top, and the columns end up on this sort of trellis-like thing. And they're little pots with roses. And those wrap around the entire room. So you even see, let's see if that last one shows it any better. It's kind of hard to tell, but you actually can see blue sky above as well. So the feeling is though you're standing in this garden house or something out in the middle of Switzerland, and you're looking around and seeing all these wonderful scenes of life going on. For example, another fisherman on a bridge. Here's the woman. Oh, when are you going to bring the fish home? We're hungry. Another boat. Now, this boat actually has steam power on it. It's a little smokestacks on it. Now, the next house. Oh, incidentally, I want to say something about that last house. Let's go back for this one. I don't know what happened to it. It got moved to Inman, and the people that owned it at the time, I wasn't sure. I talked with them and I encouraged them to wallpaper, but they were talking about maybe putting over paneling, which paneling, because of the frequent use of nails and potentially other kinds of adhesives that might use, could very well have destroyed those. I just don't know. They may have wallpapered it. I don't know anything about that house. That was 76. It's been a few years. Now let's move on to the Martins' house. Now, Kym had marbled the walls of the parlor, giving it a border of fruit and birds. The ceilings of the second floor bedrooms had blue sky painted on them, as I mentioned with that other house, and he actually painted the wooden floors to look like tiles. So, couldn't afford linoleum? Hey, he'll paint it on for you. The parlor walls had been removed, but there were at one time all that painting I mentioned. The second floor bedrooms also were repainted and carpeted. But here we see one side of the stairway going from the first floor up to the second floor. Again, there's the man and a dog. And on the other side, again, the fisherman. He shows up in all these pictures. So this is the stairwell. Now, the owners of the house had been doing some remodeling and intended to remove the paintings to the left and above the bedroom doorway so they could lower their ceilings and lower their heating bills. They were also going to remove the area above the doorway that went up to the stairs that we just saw. And I asked if I could try removing the murals before they did that. They said I could remove just the plaster and the lath, leaving the studs intact. And if I could do that, I'd be welcome to remove that. So imagine that. Just the plaster and the lath, but the studs had to stay. So first I talked with some art conservators I knew in Cooperstown. They suggested a special varnish I could put on that would protect the paintings and would be easily removed eventually. Then I went to my good friend Glenn Ediger, and I said, we got to figure this out. And Glenn, if you know Glenn, he invents things, he figures things out, and he and I sat together and we tried to figure a way we could remove those paintings from the wall, or the wall from the studs. So the way the plaster was done is you have your lath plaster, or your lath attached to the studs with nails, and when they put in the coarse plaster layer, and some of you may know this already, the plaster comes through and creates what I think they call them coins. And they sort of help that plaster hold on to the wall, that coarse plaster. And then finally, they've put the finished plaster up. So you have, number one, you have the lath. Number two, you have the coarse plaster. Then you have, number three, the finished plaster. And the paintings that we're talking about are right here, painted on that dry plaster. So it was a bit of a challenge. Here's what we saw when we got to the house. You saw the other picture. Well, it was ready for us to begin. This is the door to the bedroom, and over to the right was another painting. We were to remove all three. Well, I'm going to not go into too much detail, but I want to give you a little sense of what Glenn helped me devise. He was the genius. I was the guy that helped him. We stapled, we applied the varnish. Then I used a wallpaper paste. Again, what I mentioned earlier about wallpaper. I covered the wallpaper paste, I covered the wall with wallpaper paste and attached craft paper. So I put the craft paper up. And our challenge really was to kind of protect those paintings in that thin layer of plaster. So the craft paper gave some stability to the plaster, and then we used Celotex and adhered Celotex to plywood, which we then attached with another kind of glue to that craft paper. Up top, you can kind of see we were concerned about the weight when we finally cut it off, so we put little nails up above and hung little bits of wire to keep that so it wouldn't be too difficult for us to hold once we cut it all away. And we have sort of little handles we made out of wood. So we devised all of this. Hopefully, this was all going to go smoothly. And with one of the first paintings, it did. And this is a young Glenn Ediger. You might notice that he has acquired a good deal more wisdom over those years, which has colored his hair as it has colored mine as well. So here he is, and this was the first one we took off. This is not one of them that are here. This one's actually one that I kept because it had some damage to it before we came. But we're essentially keeping that sandwich together. Then we took pieces of metal, put them behind and in front, and we basically, at this point, were able to use a pry bar. And we pried the plaster and the lath very slowly, very carefully, and got it off. And we hung it from the top, so when it came off, it didn't fall. We were good. That went well. Here, what we had to do, incidentally, at one point we had to score the surfaces, and then we used a circular saw. We started out with a keyhole saw and then a circular saw to cut the plaster and the lath around the sides of each painting because we had to get an area in which to do the work. So I think this is a younger me also cutting that. Now you notice the younger Glenn and the younger Steve both had long hair and glasses, so I'm not sure it's me, but I think it is. Then the next thing was we took hacksaw blades. Couldn't use the hacksaw. We took hacksaw blades and just cut through all of those nails on some of these because we discovered some studs we hadn't anticipated, and we weren't able to pry them off the way we intended. We sort of jerry-rigged a little bit of prying with, and we used these hacksaw blades and our knuckles were really sore after a while. I still remember how painful some of that was. After all of that, though, that's what you see. Nothing. We managed to get them all off. There are the studs left behind. And this is one of the wall painting, the way it looked on the floor after we got it down. Now, this is the wall painting that was over the stairwell, the door to the stairwell. It had a fair amount of damage on the right side and had a lot of loss here. So what happened was, in 1976, I took these three paintings, sort of in these weird sandwiches, and I shoved them under my parents' snooker table in our basement in Beulah. From 1976 to 1989 or thereabouts, those stayed under the snooker table, just looking, like that. So those are under the snooker table. Then, about 1989, my folks moved here. You guys still call it the Snydell edition? You know the Snydell edition? Nobody knows anymore, very few. Snyder. We always call it Snydell because it's Snyder and Wadel. Snydell. I think they have a fancier name that they gave it that has managed to beat out the colloquial phrase we came up with. But anyway, my parents moved over here, and at that point, I kept the one that was the most damaged and donated the other two to Kauffman Museum. So from 1989 or thereabouts till basically 2014, nothing was done. I thought, well, maybe someday I'll figure out how to do it myself. That never happened. I didn't have Glenn to tell me what to do. So at any rate, we have a place that they do conservation or repair, if you will, of paintings. And they specialize in murals right in Denver. And I got to know those folks over the time that I was working in Denver. And they had done some other work for us for Buffalo Bill Museum, in fact. So I finally went to them with this particular one, and I said, can you guys do something with this? And they said, yeah. They gave me an estimate. And I dug deep in my pockets, and I had it conserved. So this is the way it arrived when they finally took all those layers of Celotex and plywood and craft paper off the front. That's the way it looked. Then they did work. They kind of didn't try to get too creative, but they did this to it. So they filled in. They do call it in-painting. And they were able to fill that up and finish it off. I had it framed, and then I brought it here. Was it your reunion, the Kym reunion was 2016? Or it's summer of 2015? 20th, so I got it here for the summer of 2015. And it was at the Kym reunion. The intent being, look, this one's done. Just think how cool it would be if the other two at Kauffman Museum got restored. The Kym family generously, as Andy said, they generously came up with some funds. We got a few other donations as well, and the Kauffman Museum had them restored. Now, I've gotten ahead of myself here. So, that's the way they looked at the Martins' house. These may be the only two wall paintings by Emil Kym that are viewable. I don't know, and if any of you know of any during the Q&A. There's another place?
The Gearing Flickinger house.
Okay.
The upstairs, it was all painting off, so those are gone. But there's a large mural that you said you couldn't find. That's still viewable.
Okay, at the Gearing Flickinger house. That mural is still available, and you probably have to...
Regiers live there now.
The Regiers live there. So that house, there is still something. But in terms of something publicly accessible, what you're seeing, these two murals are what are here, and here at the Kauffman Museum. So I think I'm going to conclude with this, just to say, after 42 years, it's kind of an odyssey, if you will, for these paintings. After 42 years, they're all three done. One of them's in my guest bedroom, so you're welcome to visit us and be guests in our bedroom in Denver, Colorado. And the other two are right here at Kauffman Museum, so you can see them this afternoon.
What size are they?
Well, you'll see when you go in there. How's that? That's a clever way of saying I don't remember. Anyway, do we have some questions or comments? Yeah, Marlon.
In addition to,
Do you want to come up and say something here? Oh, hey, oh, yay.
Your comment about other available art. There were 2 framed pictures
Oh.
that were salvaged, basically out of a wastebasket, and preserved and framed. And the year of that Kym reunion, we donated those 2 to the Gossel Museum.
Kauffman Museum, yeah.
And Brian Stuckey has been very helpful in guiding us through the history of the Alexandrovo community. And so as of today, we have a footprint in the Gossel Museum, and now we have a footprint here at Kauffman Museum.
That's great. And in fact, that was one of the paintings, wasn't it, of the Sea Captain Gossel going down with the ship, which is really, makes it very appropriate to be in Gossel community. Anything else? Everybody still awake? Okay. We'll get to you in just...
Currently to buy more of these out of these private homes?
Not that I am aware of anybody trying to buy them. In fact, some of those homes, again, by now, some folks may even have forgotten they're there. Yeah, Brian might have something more to add to that, too, because he's done more work than I have in the recent times.
No.
In recent times.
I'll speak as a person who grew up 2 miles away from the Lorenz Wall house. Jerry Wall was a friend of mine in school, and we'd go over there for supper sometimes. And as an 8-10-year-old kid, it struck me, what in the world is this big mural doing in a farmhouse in the middle of Kansas? Mm-hmm. And of course, I became an art teacher then, at first at Buehler and then at Gossel, and then at the point where I stumbled across Steve's thesis, looking at the MLA, and I actually copied it, and found that he came to Gossel first for 2 years from 1896 and 98, lived with a Peter Schrader in a wash house, which is still there, a couple miles west of Gossel, and did most of his wood graining on the west side of Gossel, but in Alexandroville Church. I didn't mention the pillars in the church, which were marbled, and then they were transferred to the basement of the church, which now have white paint slapped over them. And I begged the women's organization and the powers that be, please sometime remove the paint and see the marbling on there. Oh, no, that's not possible. So we won't see that. But what my other thing is that about 1993, we made a move because I wanted to have a better place to exhibit our own school artwork and artwork of those in the community and then outside professional artists. So we I got the school board to dedicate a hallway and call it the Emil Kym Memorial Art Gallery. I went to the school board and they said, is this going to cost us anything? And I said, no. but again, the Kym family came forward with donations for wallboard and track lighting, and this is the only high school art gallery in the state of Kansas that I know of that brings in outside professional artists to exhibit to high school students. And so I'm really, really proud of that. But I've been retired for 5 years or so, but that's one permanent name of Emil Kym, as well as the museum there, that the only 2 framed paintings of Emil Kym's there.
And you so this is the Lorenz House
Yes.
mural here, and that's still extant. People, it's viewable in their house still, or you're not sure about that, but that's the one to which you are referring. This is what inspired him.
This is Glenn. I'm just putting something together today that I didn't realize in the past, but the Ratzlaff house, which you showed pictures of on the Burmack and Buehler Road, the older lady Ratzlaff was an invalid, and my parents would go visit her, and I, as an 8 to 10-year-old, would sit in that room and just awe at that wall painting. Brian and I both ended up being art majors at Bethel.
Emil Kym touched your hearts, helped your muse become discovered. Yes. Thank you.
I'm sure Steve will stick around if anyone else has questions. He also has his Lakota book, and then you're also very welcome to walk to the back where we have the paintings newly restored and on the wall. Be sure to do that and have a good Fall Fest Saturday.
I can, at some point, walk back there if anybody wants to talk about them, too. Or if you're tired of me, I won't say anything.
You can go with Steve. We will have a couple staff members back there Dave Kreider, who installed the paintings here, and then our collections manager, Renee Stuckey, will also be back there. Thank you for coming.